A mail-order bride was rejected for being already pregnant until a cowboy claimed her. Baby. The train whistle screams across the dusty town as the young bride steps down, clutching her carpet bag in her swollen belly. Her promised husband spits in the dirt and storms off, shouting for all to hear, "I won't marry another man's shame." The crowd gasps, the church bell tolls, and whispers spread like wildfire. But then a cowboy steps forward, hat in hand, voice steady as thunder. "If no man will claim her, I will. Her baby has a home with me. What should have been salvation only sparks more danger." The richest rancher in the county slams his boot heels down, claiming the child as his own. His lawyer sharpens the law. The sheriff rattles the jail keys, and fists fly in the street. She came west for a new life, but now the whole town is watching. Will her unborn child be torn from her arms? Or will the cowboy's vow be strong enough to stand against pride, power, and the law itself? Comment below and tell me where in the world you're joining from. And if this story made you pause for a moment, hit that subscribe button for more. Morning sun painted long shadows across the weathered wooden platform of Miller's Creek Depot. A mix of early autumn dust and steam from the locomotive hung in the air like a thin veil, catching the golden light. The westbound train's wheels scraped against the iron rails with a piercing screech that made more than a few. Townspeople wince. Rhea Whitcomb gripped the handrail tightly as she descended the steep steps from the passenger car. Her small carpet bag felt heavy after the long journey, and her back ached from sitting upright for so many hours. She paused at the bottom of the steps, one hand instinctively resting on her swollen belly. Hidden beneath the folds of her travel dress, the platform bustled with activity. Ranch hands in dusty work clothes leaned against wooden posts, their spurs clicking softly as they shifted their weight. Women in calico dresses gathered in small groups, whispering behind gloved hands. A few merchants stood near their storefronts, watching the new arrivals with keen interest. Rhea's eyes searched the crowd. For the man she knew only from letters and a simple tintype, Mr. James Harridan. Her heart beat faster as she spotted a tall figure making his way through the crowd. He matched the photograph she carried, clean-shaven, wearing a black suit that set him apart from the working men around him that Mr. Harridan approached with measured steps, his boots striking the wooden planks with sharp, decisive sounds. His initial expression was one of proper courtesy, a tight smile beneath cold eyes. But as he drew closer, those eyes traveled down, taking in her condition. The smile vanished like water on hot sand. What is the meaning of this? His voice carried across the platform, sharp and accusing. Several heads turned their way. "You didn't mention this in your letters." Rhea's throat tightened. "Sir, no," he cut her off with a sharp gesture. "I won't be made a fool of." His voice rose, ensuring everyone could hear. "I will not marry a woman who arrives carrying another man's shame." The words struck Rhea like physical blows. Her cheeks burned as whispers rippled through the crowd. She could hear fragments of their cruel speculation. Knew it was too good to be true, ... Poor Mr. A-R-R-I-D-A, ... The nerve of some people, ... double quotes tears welled in Rhea's eyes as Mr. Harridan turned on his heel and strode away, leaving her alone in a circle of judgmental stares. Her legs trembled beneath her, threatening to give way. The sheriff, a weathered man with a star pinned to his vest, merely shook his head and looked away, offering no help or comfort. The weight of public humiliation pressed down on her shoulders like a physical burden. Her vision blurred with tears as she fumbled with her carpet bag, no idea where to go or what to do next. The whispers continued, cutting deeper with each passing moment. Then movement caught her eye. A tall figure stepped forward from the crowd, his movements unhurried but purposeful. Luke McAllister was known throughout Miller's Creek as a man of few words but solid character. His work clothes were dust-covered from the morning's ranch duties, but he carried himself with quiet dignity. Luke removed his hat and held it over his heart, a gesture of old-world courtesy that stopped the whispers mid-breath. His voice, though not loud, carried clearly across the suddenly quiet platform. "If no man will claim her, I will. The words hung in the air like the morning mist. Gasps rippled through the crowd, followed by a deeper silence. Luke's steady gaze never left Rhea's face, and in his eyes she saw no judgment, only compassion and something that might have been strength offered freely. Rhea's hands trembled as she clutched her carpet bag. Her heart pounded so hard she was sure everyone could hear it. The cruel whispers had transformed into shocked murmurs. Luke McAllister. The quiet one from the Peterson spread? What's he thinking? But Luke paid them no mind. He stepped closer to Rhea, his movements careful, as if approaching a frightened deer. When he spoke again, his voice was gentle, meant for her ears alone. Ma'am, if you'll have me, I offer you my name and protection. He paused, then added softly, both of you. Fresh tears spilled down Rhea's cheeks. But these were different from the tears of shame and fear from moments before. She saw in Luke's face nothing of the cruel judgment she'd faced from Mr. Harridan, nothing of the condemnation from the townspeople. Instead, she saw simple human kindness, offered without reservation. The morning sun continued to climb, burning away the lingering mist. The train's steam had dissipated, leaving the air clear and sharp. In that moment of clarity, Rhea found her voice, small but steady. Why would you do this for a stranger? Luke's response was simple, spoken with the straightforward honesty that marked everything about him. Because it's right, ma'am. And because no one should face the world alone. The depot platform had grown quiet enough to hear the telegraph clicking in the station office. The townspeople watched, transfixed, as this scene unfolded before them. Even the sheriff had straightened up, his expression thoughtful rather than dismissive now. A railroad worker called out the all aboard for the trains. Continued journey west, breaking the spell of silence. The sound of the locomotive building steam filled the air, but neither Luke nor Rhea moved. They stood in their own moment, while around them the world seemed to hold its breath. I have nothing to offer, Rhea whispered, her voice catching. No dowry, no family connections. Nothing but trouble and ... You have courage, Luke interrupted gently. Saw that plain as day when you stood tall under cruel words. That's worth more than gold to my thinking. The train whistle pierced the air, and the massive wheels began to turn. As the locomotive pulled away from the station, it seemed to take with it the weight of Rhea's past, leaving her standing at a crossroads she never could have. Imagine when she stepped off those train steps just minutes before. The crowd began to disperse, though many still cast glances their way. But Luke remained steady, his hat still held respectfully over his heart, waiting for her answer with the patience of a man who understood that some moments couldn't be rushed in that moment. As the morning sun warmed the platform and a new day stretched out before them, Rhea felt something she hadn't dared to feel in months: hope. It was small and fragile, like a bird's egg in spring, but it was there. Luke gently touched Rhea's elbow, steering her away from the hostile stares that still lingered at the train platform. His tall frame provided a buffer between her and the townsfolk's judgment, his steady presence like a shield against their whispers. This way, ma'am, he said softly, guiding her toward the livery stable where patches of shade offered relief from the morning sun. The smell of hay and leather drifted from the open doors, mixing with the dust that swirled around their feet. Rhea's steps faltered. She pulled back slightly, her eyes searching his face. Why? Her voice trembled. Why would you risk your good name for a stranger? And one in my ... Condition? Luke adjusted his hat, considering his words carefully. The simple truth seemed best. I reckon I've seen enough cruelty in this world, he said, his voice low but firm. Couldn't stand by and watch more of it, not when I could help. He paused, then added, I've got a line shack, nothing fancy, but it's dry and warm. You're welcome there until you get steady on your feet. Rhea's hands twisted the handle of her carpet bag. I have no right to accept such kindness. Maybe not, Luke agreed. But you've got need of it, and that's enough for me. They walked slowly down the town's main street, where curious eyes followed their every move. Children stopped their play to stare openly, pointing and whispering. Women gathered on the boardwalk outside the millinery, their faces pinched with disapproval as they muttered behind raised hands. The bell above the general store door jingled as Luke held it open for Rhea. Inside, the familiar scents of coffee beans, leather goods, and dried herbs filled the air. Sunlight filtered through dusty windows, catching motes that danced in the beam. Morning? Mr. Jenkins. Luke nodded to the storekeeper, a thin man with wire-rimmed spectacles. Need some flour and salt pork? Jenkins' eyes darted between Luke and Rhea, his lips pressed into a thin line. He gathered the supplies without his usual friendly chatter, wrapped them in brown paper, and tallied the cost. As Luke counted out coins from his leather purse, Jenkins leaned forward. Word travels fast in Miller's Creek, Luke, he said in a low voice. Don't be surprised if Preacher Fenton won't marry the likes of her. Luke's jaw tightened, but his voice remained even. Much obliged for the warning, Mr. Jenkins. He gathered the packages, nodding once before turning away. Outside, Luke's wagon waited, hitched to 2 sturdy bay horses. Their coats gleamed in the sunlight, well brushed and cared for. Luke set the packages in the wagon bed, then turned to help. Rhea climbed up to the wooden seat, her cheeks flushed as she struggled with her skirts and the awkwardness of her condition. Luke's strong hand steadied her, respectful but sure, until she was settled. He climbed up beside her, leaving as much space between them as the seat. A loud dot the wagon creaked as they set off, moving at a gentle pace that wouldn't jostle his passenger too badly. The town fell away behind them, replaced by the vast sweep of prairie. Tall grass rippled in the breeze like waves on a golden sea. Here and there, wildflowers dotted the landscape with splashes of purple and yellow. Rhea sat straight-backed, her hands folded in her lap, stealing glances at the quiet man beside her. Luke kept his eyes on the trail, giving her the privacy of her thoughts. The only sounds were the steady clip-clop of hooves, the creak of leather harness, and the whisper of wind through the grass. The sun was sinking toward the horizon when Luke finally turned the wagon down a narrow track. His line shot came into view, a simple one-room structure built of rough-hewn logs, with a small barn beside it. A thin curl of smoke rose from the stone chimney, where banked coals still glowed from morning. Luke helped Rhea down from the wagon, then carried her carpetbag inside. The interior was neat but spare. A narrow bunk against one wall, a simple cot on the other, a plank table with 2 mismatched chairs, and a stone hearth with a black iron cook stove. It ain't much, Luke said, setting her bag down carefully. But it's shelter. While Rhea stood uncertainly in the middle of the room, Luke busied himself with practical tasks. He built up the fire, mixed cornmeal and water in a cast iron skillet, and set it to bake. The familiar motions filled the awkward silence. Soon the rich smell of cornbread filled the small space. Luke sliced it carefully, steam rising from the golden crumb. The lamplight cast long shadows on the log walls as they sat at the rough table. Rhea broke off a small piece of cornbread, her movements delicate. "Thank you," she said softly, "for sparing me the shame of being stranded there. I know what people must be saying." Luke looked up from his plate, his eyes serious in the flickering light. "Folks'll talk," he agreed. "But talk ain't truth, and truth ain't always what folks can see." They finished their simple meal in silence. Outside, a coyote called lonely in the distance, and another answered. The fire died down to glowing coals, sending shadows dancing across the walls. Luke cleared the dishes, then gestured to the narrow bunk. "Take the bed, ma'am. I'll make do with the cot." Rhea nodded, not meeting his eyes. She kept her back turned as Luke stretched out on the cot, still fully clothed except for his boots. The straw mattress crackled as she lay down, pulling the rough blanket up to her chin. Sleep came slowly to the little cabin. Rhea lay awake, listening to Luke's steady breathing from across the room, wondering at the strange turns life could take. One moment, standing alone and shamed at a train platform. The next, sheltered by a stranger's unexpected kindness. Luke stayed still on his cot, but his eyes remained open, watching the last embers pulse red in the hearth. He'd acted on instinct at the depot, following what he knew to be right. Now, in the quiet dark of night, he could only pray that instinct would prove true. The prairie wind whispered around the cabin's corners, and somewhere in the distance, an owl called. Inside, two strangers lay in uneasy silence, each wondering what the dawn would bring. Morning sunlight streamed through the single window of the line shack, casting golden squares across the plank floor. Rhea stirred on the narrow bunk, the unfamiliar scents of wood smoke and frying bacon pulling her from sleep. Her eyes fluttered open to find Luke already dressed and moving quietly around the small cook stove. He glanced over, noticing she was awake. "Morning, ma'am," he said softly, his voice gentle, as if not to startle her. "Hope the bacon didn't wake you too early." "No," Rhea replied, smoothing her wrinkled skirts as she sat up. "I should have risen earlier to help." Luke shook his head, sliding eggs from the iron skillet onto 2 tin plates. "You needed the rest." He offered her a plate, then pulled one of the mismatched chairs out for her at the small table. The eggs were perfectly cooked, the bacon crisp. Rhea couldn't remember the last time someone had prepared a meal for her. "Thank you," she said softly, cutting into the eggs with the edge of her fork. Luke settled into the other chair, his long legs stretched out carefully to avoid bumping hers under the small table. "Got chores need doing today," he said between bites. "Fence on the north line needs mending. Cattle been pushing through. Stock needs watering too, and I'm running low on splitwood." Rhea set down her fork. "Please, let me help with something." "I can't be a burden." "Ain't a burden," Luke said firmly. "But if you're set on helping, there's washing needs doing, and ... double quotes." He hesitated. "Wouldn't mind a hot meal waiting when the work's done?" "Of course," Rhea nodded, grateful for the chance to be useful. "I can manage that much at least." After breakfast, Luke hitched the wagon while Rhea tidied the dishes. The morning air was crisp, promising another hot day ahead. Luke helped her up onto the wagon seat, then climbed up beside her. "Thought we might ride into town," he said carefully, gathering the reins. "See Preacher Fenton." Rhea's hands twisted in her lap. "You mean about a marriage?" Luke nodded, keeping his eyes on the trailhead. "If you're willing, ain't right for a lady to stay unchaperoned, even if folks know my intentions are honorable." The wagon creaked along the rutted trail, prairie grass waving on either side. Rhea watched a meadowlark take wing, her heart fluttering like the bird's wings. After yesterday's humiliation at the depot, the thought of facing more town judgment made her stomach clench. The white-painted church came into view, its small steeple reaching toward the clear blue sky. Luke tied the horses to the hitching post and helped Rhea down, her movements awkward with the weight of the child she carried. Inside, the church was cool and dim. Sunlight filtered through plain glass windows, gust motes dancing in the beams. Preacher Fenton sat at his desk, writing in a leather-bound book. He looked up as they entered, his stern face growing harder as he noted Rhea's condition. "Mr. McAllister," he said, rising slowly. "I heard about yesterday's incident at the depot." "Preacher." Luke touched the brim of his hat respectfully. "We've come to ask you to marry us." Fenton's eyes narrowed, fixing on Rhea. "Marriage is a sacred covenant before God, young woman. It cannot be built on secrets and shame." His voice was cold. "Who is the father of your child?" Rhea's face paled. Her hands trembled as she gripped her skirts. I cannot say, cannot or will not," Fenton pressed. "How can I, in good conscience, join two people when one harbors such a... The truth must come to light before any blessing can be given. With respect, preacher," Luke's quiet voice held steel. "The truth that matters is that this lady needs protection and care. I aim to provide it. Noble intentions, perhaps," Fenton said, "but misguided. I cannot perform this marriage while secrets stand between you. It would mock the sanctity of the sacrament." He turned away, making it clear the discussion was over. Outside in the harsh sunlight, Rhea's hand shook so badly she could barely grasp the wagon seat. Luke steadied her, his touch gentle but sure. "We'll find another way," he promised softly. "Maybe ride to the next town over, find another preacher." Tears threatened, but Rhea fought them back. She wouldn't cry again in this town that had already seen too much of her weakness. They hadn't gone far when a rider approached, dust rising from his horse's hooves. The man pulled up alongside their wagon, his weathered face set in hard lines. "McAllister," he called. "Need a word." Luke drew the wagon to a halt. "Mr. Tillman," he nodded to his foreman. Jed Tillman's eyes flicked to Rhea. Then back to Luke. "Heard about your ... situation. Cattle companies got standards to maintain. Keeping a ruined woman could cost you your position." Luke's jaw tightened, but his voice remained level. "That a fact?" "Just giving fair warning," Tillman said. "Might want to reconsider your choices." He touched his hat brim and rode on, leaving another cloud of dust in his wake. The rest of the ride home was silent, each lost in their own thoughts as the sun arced across the sky. By the time they reached the line shack, dusk was painting the prairie in purple and gold. Luke went to tend to the horses while Rhea built up the fire in the cook stove. She found comfort in the familiar motions of preparing supper, letting the rhythm of domestic tasks soothe her troubled mind. After the meal was cleared away, Rhea noticed one of Luke's shirts hanging on a peg, the sleeve torn at the shoulder. She found his sewing kit and settled in the pool of lamplight to mend it. Grateful for something useful to do with her hands, Luke sat in the other chair, working with quiet concentration on a broken stirrup. The only sounds were the click of his tools and the soft whisper of Rhea's needle through fabric. The simple domesticity of the moment wrapped around them like a warm blanket. Though no words passed between them, something settled in the air. A quiet understanding, a growing trust. Outside, the town's judgment might wait to wound them again. But here in the circle of lamplight, they had found a fragile peace. Rhea's needle moved steadily, repairing the torn seam with tiny, even stitches. Each one felt like a small act of gratitude for the man who had offered shelter when all others turned away. Luke worked with the same steady patience on his task, the leather creaking softly as he pulled the stitches tight. The lamp flame flickered, casting their shadows large against the log walls. Two people, brought together by circumstance and kindness, finding their way forward one small step at a time. The Sunday morning sun cast long shadows across the dusty street as Luke guided the wagon toward the white-painted church. Rhea sat beside him, her hands clutching her worn prayer book. She had taken extra care with her appearance, wearing her best calico dress despite its tight fit across her growing middle. "You sure about this?" Luke asked softly as he drew the wagon to a halt. Rhea lifted her chin. "We can't hide forever. Better to face them head on." Luke helped her down from the wagon, steadying her with gentle hands. The morning air carried the sweet scent of late summer flowers from the church's small garden. Mixing with the earthy smell of horses and leather, they climbed the wooden steps together, the boards creaking beneath their feet. At the door, Rhea hesitated for just a moment before squaring her shoulders and stepping inside. The usual morning chatter died as heads turned their way. Luke guided her to an empty pew near the back, ignoring the whispers that rippled through the congregation like wind through prairie grass. Mrs. Peterson, the banker's wife, gathered her skirts closer as they passed, as if Rhea's condition might be catching. Preacher Fenton stood at his pulpit, his expression stern as he watched them settle into their seats. The morning sunlight streaming through plain glass windows caught the silver in his hair as he opened his Bible. The sermon had barely begun when the double doors at the back of the church swung open with a bang that made several people jump. Randall Pierce strode in, his boots clicking against the wooden floor. Behind him came Arthur Dawson, the territory's most expensive lawyer, clutching his black leather case. Pierce's fine suit and polished boots spoke of wealth and influence. His dark eyes swept the congregation until they found Rhea. A smirk crossed his handsome face as he settled into a pew across the aisle, close enough for Rhea to see the gold watch chain glinting at his vest. Rhea's face had gone white as chalk. Her fingers gripped her prayer book so tightly her knuckles showed pale beneath her skin. Luke shifted slightly closer, letting his arm brush against hers in silent support. The rest of the service passed in a blur of hymns and scripture readings. Rhea's voice trembled as she sang, but she held her head high. Luke found himself watching Pierce instead of following along in his hymnal. The wealthy rancher's expression remained smugly confident throughout the service. As the congregation began filing out after the final prayer, Pierce made his move. He stepped directly into their path, his lawyer hovering at his shoulder like a well-dressed shadow. "Miss Whitcomb?" Pierce's voice carried clearly through the church. "Or should I say Mrs. McAllister? Though I hear no marriage has taken place." His smile didn't reach his eyes. "I believe we have some matters to discuss." Luke stepped forward, but Pierce continued before he could speak. "That child you carry is mine, Rhea. You know it. And I mean to claim what's mine when it's born." A collective gasp rose from the lingering congregation. Rhea stood frozen, her face drained of all color. Even Preacher Fenton had stopped to watch, his Bible clutched to his chest. "Mr. Dawson here has already drawn up the necessary papers," Pierce went on smoothly. "I'll provide handsomely for the child's upbringing. After all, a Pierce should be raised properly, not in some line rider shack." Luke moved between them, his voice low, but carrying clearly in the hushed church. "Miss Whitcomb is under my protection, Pierce. You do well to leave her be." Pierce's smile turned cold. "Protection? Is that what you call it? Taking advantage of a woman in desperate circumstances." He turned to address the watching crowd. "I mean to do right by my child. What decent man wouldn't?" "That's enough," Luke's quiet voice held steel. "Miss Whitcomb has nothing to say to you. Good day, Mr. Pierce." He took Rhea's elbow gently, guiding her past Pierce and his lawyer. The crowd parted before them, whispers following in their wake. Rhea walked as if in a dream, her steps unsteady as Luke helped her into the wagon. The ride home was silent save for the creak of wagon wheels and the occasional snort from the horses. The setting sun painted the prairie grass gold by the time they reached the line shack. Luke helped Rhea down, noting how she trembled beneath his hands. Inside, he built up the fire while Rhea sank into one of the wooden chairs, her face still pale in the growing darkness. Luke lit the lantern, its warm glow pushing back the shadows. Neither spoke as he prepared a simple supper of beans and cornbread. Finally, as the night settled around the small cabin, Rhea's soft voice broke the silence. "I suppose you deserve to know the truth." Luke set aside the coffee pot he'd been cleaning. "You don't owe me any explanations." "Yes, I do." Rhea's hands twisted in her lap. "I met Randall Pierce in Missouri 6 months ago. He was there on business, staying at the hotel where I worked as a maid." Her voice grew distant with memory. "He was so charming, so different from the local boys. He brought me flowers, spoke of marriage and a fine house out west." Luke sat quietly, letting her tell it in her own time. The lantern flame flickered, casting dancing shadows on the log walls. "I was young and foolish," Rhea continued, her voice barely above a whisper. "I believed his promises. He said we'd be married as soon as he finished his business dealings." A bitter smile touched her lips. "When I told him about the baby, he laughed. Said he already had a wife back home. And I was nothing but a silly girl who should have known better." Anger rose in Luke's chest, hot and fierce, but he kept his voice gentle. "What did you do then?" "What could I do? I left Missouri, used my savings to answer Mr. Harridan's advertisement for a mail order bride. I thought ... Her voice broke. "I thought I could start fresh, somewhere new, where no one knew my shame." Tears spilled down her cheeks. "Now Pierce means to take my baby. He'll win too. He has money and influence, and I'm just a fallen woman who ... No." Luke's quiet voice cut through her words. He moved to kneel beside her chair, taking her trembling hands in his. "Listen to me, Rhea. You ain't fallen, and you ain't alone. That man may have money and lawyers, but he doesn't have the right to destroy your life twice over. But what can we do?" Rhea's voice was small in the lamplight. "We'll fight him," Luke said firmly. "I ain't much for fancy words or legal papers, but I know right from wrong. You and your baby have a place here, long as you want it." He squeezed her hands gently. "I meant what I said that day at the depot. I claim you both, if you'll have me." Rhea's tears fell faster now, but something like hope showed through them. She leaned forward, resting her forehead against their joined hands. "Why?" she whispered. "Why would you take on such trouble for a stranger?" "Because it's right," Luke said, simply. "And because you ain't a stranger anymore." The lantern flame danced, casting their shadows large against the wall. A man kneeling beside a weeping woman, their hands clasped in the quiet darkness. Outside, a coyote called lonely across the prairie. But inside the small cabin, something like peace began to settle over them. Both dawn painted the eastern sky in streaks of pink and gold as Luke saddled his horse for the morning's work. His thoughts churned like creek waters after a storm while he checked the fence lines. The weight of Pierce's threats and Rhea's tears from yesterday pressed heavy on his mind. He paused atop a small rise, scanning the endless waves of prairie grass. A meadowlark's song carried on the breeze, but it did little to ease his restlessness. The responsibility of protecting Rhea and her unborn child from Pierce's schemes felt as vast as the Texas sky above him. Back at the line shack, Rhea kept her hands busy with cooking and mending. The hem of one of Luke's work shirts needed attention, and she welcomed the familiar rhythm of needle and thread. Still, each stitch seemed to remind her that she was living on borrowed grace, dependent on a stranger's kindness. When the afternoon sun hung high, Rhea gathered her courage and some eggs to trade at the general store. The walk into town felt longer than usual, each step marked by stares and whispers. Outside the mercantile, a cluster of women drew their skirts aside as she passed, turning their backs like flowers avoiding shade. Inside the store, Martha Evans stood at the counter, her arms full of fabric. Unlike the others, she met Rhea's eyes with warmth. "Those look like fine eggs you've brought," Martha said, nodding at Rhea's basket. "My Henry surely does love a fresh egg for his breakfast." Rhea's throat tightened at this simple kindness. "Thank you, Mrs. Evans. They're still warm from the nesting boxes. Call me Martha." "Dear." She shifted her packages and lowered her voice. "Don't you mind those others?" "They've forgotten what the good book says about casting stones." A small smile touched Rhea's lips. The first genuine one in days. As she left the store, Martha's kindness felt like a warm shawl wrapped around her shoulders. That evening, dark clouds began building in the west, their edges rimmed with dying sunlight. Luke and Rhea sat in comfortable silence over their supper of beans and cornbread when the first rumble of thunder shook the cabin walls. "Looks to be a big one coming," Luke observed, glancing at the window where lightning flickered like distant lanterns. The storm broke with sudden fury. Rain lashed against the roof while thunder crashed overhead. Wind howled through the cracks in the walls, making the lantern flame dance wildly. Then came the pounding at the door. Luke grabbed his rifle, but when he yanked the door open, they found young Billy Thompson, drenched and desperate. "Please," he gasped, "my Sarah's having the baby." Paws rode for the doctor, but she's suffering something awful. Ma said to fetch help if we could. Rhea was already reaching for her shawl. "How far along is she?" "Pain started this morning. Waters broke an hour past." Billy's voice shook. "She's screaming something terrible." "I'll come," Rhea said firmly. Tying her shawl against the rain, Luke caught her arm. "You sure about this?" She met his eyes steadily. "I helped the midwife back home. I know what to do." Lightning split the sky as Luke helped Rhea into the saddle behind Billy. "I'll fetch supplies from town." He called over the storm's roar. "What do you need?" "Clean linens if you can get them. And Martha Evans. She'll know what else we might want." The ride to the Thompson place was treacherous in the storm, but Billy's horse knew the way. They found Sarah Thompson writhing on her bed, her mother-in-law wringing her hands helplessly beside her. Rhea took charge with quiet authority. She sent the mother-in-law for hot water and clean towels, then sat beside Sarah, taking her hand. "I'm here now," she soothed. "We'll see this through together." Hours passed in a blur of contractions and prayers. Rhea spoke softly, encouraging Sarah through each wave of pain. When the young woman's strength began to fail, Rhea sang hymns, her clear voice rising above the storm's fury. Luke returned with Martha Evans and supplies just as Sarah's. Labor reached its peak. Martha's experienced eyes widened with approval at how Rhea had positioned the laboring woman and prepared the room. "You've done this before," Martha observed. Rolling up her sleeves, Rhea nodded, wiping Sarah's brow. "My aunt was a midwife. I learned at her side." Together they worked through the night. When Sarah's courage faltered, Rhea held her hands and prayed aloud, her voice steady and sure. As dawn approached, Sarah gave one final push, and a new cry joined the last rumbles of thunder. "A girl," Rhea announced. cleaning the tiny red face. Perfect and strong, she wrapped the baby in clean linen before placing her in Sarah's trembling arms. Martha squeezed Rhea's shoulder. "You did well, child. A true blessing you were here." The doctor arrived an hour later, looking harried from his night ride. He examined mother and child, then nodded approvingly. "Couldn't have done better myself," he admitted, looking at Rhea with new respect. Luke, who had waited through the night in the kitchen with Billy and his father, helped Rhea mount for the ride home. She swayed with exhaustion, but her face glowed with quiet joy. Word spread quickly through the small community. By midday, several women who had shunned Rhea at the store now stopped by the Thompson place to see the new baby and to hear how the fallen woman had proven herself a guardian angel in the storm. Sarah Thompson, cradling her daughter, told anyone who would listen how Rhea's prayers and gentle hands had given her strength. Billy's mother spoke of Rhea's quiet competence, how she had known exactly what to do when fear threatened to overwhelm them all. Martha Evans made sure the story reached every corner of town. "The Lord works in mysterious ways," she told the ladies at the quilting circle. "Sometimes it takes a storm to clear the air and help us see what's truly in a person's heart." That evening, Luke found Rhea at the cabin's single window, watching the sunset paint the rain-washed prairie in gold. Her face still showed the night's exhaustion, but something had changed in her bearing, as if helping bring new life into the world had begun to heal something broken inside her. "You did a mighty fine thing last night," Luke said quietly. Rhea turned to him, a soft smile touching her lips. It felt good to be useful again, to help instead of just being helped. "You were never just a burden," Luke replied. "But I reckon some folks in town might be starting to see that for themselves." Now, the sunset light caught the tears in Rhea's eyes, turning them to diamonds. "Thank you," she whispered, "for believing in me before anyone else would." The morning sun cast long shadows across the dusty street as Luke guided the wagon into town. 5 days had passed since the stormy night, when Rhea helped deliver the Thompson baby. The wooden wheels creaked beneath them as they made their way past the livery stable and toward the general store. Rhea noticed the change immediately, though some townsfolk still turned away. Others offered tentative nods. Mrs. Thompson stood outside the millinery, cradling her newborn. She waved warmly as they passed. "Good morning, Mrs. McAllister," she called out, using the name that wasn't yet official. "Baby Rose is thriving thanks to your help." Rhea's cheeks colored at both the name and the praise. "She's a beautiful child," she replied softly. "I'm just grateful I could help." Luke pulled the wagon to a stop near the general store. His strong hands steadied Rhea as she stepped down, her advancing pregnancy making her movements more careful. "I need to see Tom at the smithy about a wagon wheel," he said. "Will you be all right looking at supplies?" "Yes, thank you." Rhea smoothed her skirts, gathering her courage. The store's bell tinkled as she entered. Inside, Martha Evans stood arranging dry goods on a shelf. She smiled broadly at Rhea. "Come to look at the new fabrics that arrived yesterday. They're lovely, especially that blue calico." Rhea made her way to the fabric counter, where bolts of cloth lay in neat rows. Her fingers traced the patterns, florals, stripes, and simple checks. The blue calico Martha mentioned caught her eye, its color reminding her of summer skies. "That would make a fine dress," Martha observed, coming to stand beside her, "especially with a child coming. You'll want something that gives you room to grow." Rhea hesitated, counting the coins in her pocket. Luke had insisted she take some money for necessities, but she hated spending what wasn't truly hers. Martha seemed to read her thoughts. "The price just came down yesterday," she said with a wink, "and I happen to have some buttons that would match perfectly." At the smithy, Luke watched Tom inspect the wagon wheel. The metalwork needed reinforcing before winter came. The rhythmic clang of hammer on anvil filled the air as Tom made the repairs. "Heard your woman did right by the Thompsons," Tom said between strikes. "Sarah might not have made it through without her there." Luke nodded, a hint of pride warming his chest. "She's got healing hands, that's certain. Reckon some folks were too quick to judge," Tom continued. "Including me, maybe." "Sorry about that." The wheel repaired, Luke headed back to the general store. He found Rhea carefully folding a length of blue fabric, her face brightened by the small purchase. They loaded their supplies, flour, coffee, salt pork, and the precious fabric, into the wagon. The afternoon sun had begun its westward slide as they started the journey. Home, the steady clip-clop of hooves and creak of leather created a peaceful rhythm. Fields of late summer grass stretched to the horizon, dotted with wildflowers. A hawk circled overhead, riding the warm currents of air. "Thank you," Rhea said quietly, "for the money for the fabric." "I'll make it last. You don't need to scrimp so," Luke replied. "What's mine is yours now." The simple statement hung in the air between them. Rhea twisted the plain gold band she wore, a ring Luke had given her for appearance's sake. Though no preacher had blessed their union, "Why did you really take me in?" she asked suddenly. "The truth of it?" Luke was quiet for a long moment, hand steady on the reins. "Maybe because I know what it's like to have nowhere to turn," he said finally. "Lost my parents when I was 12. Fever took them both in the space of a week." Rhea's hand touched his arm gently. "I'm so sorry." "Drifted from ranch to ranch after that, working where I could. Never stayed anywhere long enough to call it home." He glanced at her. "Never thought I was suited to family life. Reckoned I was meant to be a solitary sort. And now?" Rhea's voice was barely above a whisper. Luke's hands tightened on the reins. "Now I'm not so sure about that." The sun was setting when they reached the line shack. Luke helped Rhea down, his hands lingering at her waist a moment longer than necessary, while he tended to the horses. She began preparing their evening meal. The small cabin filled with the aroma of simmering stew. Rhea added the last of their carrots and a pinch of precious pepper. Luke had built up the fire, its warmth pushing back the evening chill. They ate in comfortable silence, sharing a loaf of fresh bread Martha had insisted they take. After the dishes were cleared, Luke helped Rhea onto the small porch. The night air was cool but not cold, stars beginning to pepper the darkening sky. They sat on the rough-hewn bench, shoulders nearly touching. Crickets chirped their evening symphony while a distant coyote called to its mate. "I always dreamed of a real home," Rhea said softly. "Not just a house, but a place where I belonged, where I felt safe." Her hand rested protectively over her growing belly. When things went wrong, I thought that dream was lost forever." Luke's calloused hand found hers in the growing darkness. His touch was gentle, almost hesitant. "Dreams don't die so easy," he said. "Sometimes they just take a different path than we expected." Rhea's fingers interlaced with his, drawing strength from his quiet steadiness. A shooting star streaked across the heavens, leaving a trail of silver light. "I was afraid all the time before," she admitted. "Afraid of the future, afraid of people's judgment, afraid of being alone. And now?" She turned to look at him, his face half-shadowed in the starlight. "Now, I'm not so afraid anymore." Luke's thumb traced small circles on her palm. Without words, Rhea leaned her head against his shoulder. The tension she had carried since stepping off that train weeks ago began to ease. The line shack stood small but sturdy behind them, lamplight glowing golden through its single window. What had once felt like a place of exile now seemed transformed, not by any physical change, but by the growing warmth between its inhabitants. They sat together under the star-strewn sky, their shared silence more eloquent than words. The night air carried the scent of sage and prairie grass, while the distant howl of a coyote echoed across the plains. In that moment, two lonely souls began to recognize that family could be found in most unexpected places. Built not from obligation, but from choice, understanding, and tender care. Dawn painted the prairie sky in shades of pearl and gold as Luke stepped out onto the porch. The morning air carried the crisp promise of autumn, though summer's warmth still lingered. He paused, watching Rhea through the window as she moved about the cabin's interior, already at work despite the early hour. Inside, Rhea hummed softly while kneading bread dough on the small wooden table. Flour dusted her apron, and a few strands of hair had escaped her neat bun. The familiar motions brought comfort, pressing, folding. turning, as the dough became smooth beneath her practiced hands. Luke entered, boots quiet on the plank floor. "Smells good in here already. Fresh bread by noon," Rhea promised, smiling. "And I found enough fabric to make curtains for these bare windows. Reckon that'll make it feel more like home." Luke poured coffee into 2 tin cups, setting one near her workspace. "I'll see to the stock. Then maybe we could try that riding lesson we talked about." Rhea's eyes brightened at the suggestion, though nervousness flickered across her face. "You're sure it's safe in my condition?" "Old Maple's gentle as a lamb," Luke assured her. "And I'll be right beside you." They shared a quiet breakfast of cornmeal mush sweetened with molasses. Afterward, Luke headed out to tend the livestock while Rhea turned her attention to the windows. The morning sun streamed through the glass as she measured and cut the fabric she'd purchased in town. Outside, Luke forked fresh hay into the corrals, filled water troughs, and checked hooves for stones. Between tasks, he found himself glancing toward the cabin. Through the window, he could see Rhea standing on tiptoe, draping fabric across the wooden rod he'd mounted for her. The sight stirred something warm in his chest by mid-morning. Fresh curtains hung at each window, their blue and white patterns softening the cabin's rough-hewn walls. The bread dough had risen in its bowl, ready for baking. Rhea stepped back to admire her work just as Luke came in from his chores. "Makes quite a difference," he said. Taking in the transformed space, Rhea nodded, one hand resting on her growing belly. "It feels more like a proper home now. Ready for that riding lesson?" Luke asked, noting how the morning's accomplishments had boosted her confidence, though uncertainty crossed her features. Rhea squared her shoulders and nodded. "I suppose there's no time like the present." Luke led her to the corral where Maple, his old bay mare, stood dozing in the sun. The horse's coat gleamed from recent brushing, her dark eyes gentle as Luke approached with Rhea. "Here," Luke said, showing Rhea how to hold the reins. "Firm but not tight. Horses can sense fear, so try to stay calm." He helped her mount, his strong hands steady at her waist as she settled into the saddle. Rhea gripped the pommel tightly, her knuckles white. "Breathe," Luke reminded her softly. "Maple won't move until you're ready." Gradually, Rhea's grip relaxed. Luke walked beside them as Maple ambled slowly around the corral. The horse's steady gait helped Rhea find her rhythm. "That's it," Luke encouraged. "You're doing fine." A sudden meadowlark call startled them all. Maple shifted and Rhea listed sideways with a small cry. Luke's quick hand steadied her before she could slip far to his surprise and delight. Rhea laughed, a bright, genuine sound that made his heart leap. "Oh my," she gasped, still giggling. "I must have looked quite foolish." "Not at all," Luke assured her, though he couldn't help grinning. Everyone tips a bit their first time. They continued the lesson until Rhea felt more secure in the saddle. The morning sun grew warmer, and the scent of baking bread wafted from the cabin's open window. "Better check on that loaf," Rhea said finally. "Before it burns," Luke helped her dismount, his hands lingering at her waist a moment longer than necessary. Their eyes met briefly before Rhea ducked her head. Cheeks flushed from more than just the exercise. The afternoon passed in comfortable industry. Luke mended tack while Rhea finished household tasks. The fresh bread cooled on the windowsill, its golden crust promising comfort at supper time. As evening approached, they sat down to a simple meal of beans, bread, and the last of the summer tomatoes. Luke bowed his head, waiting for Rhea to join him in prayer. "Dear Lord," Rhea began, her voice trembling slightly. "We thank you for this food, for this shelter, and ... She faltered, emotions threatening to overwhelm her. "For bringing us together," Luke continued steadily, his quiet faith wrapping around her like a warm blanket. "And for showing us that your plans are greater than our own. Amen." "Amen," Rhea whispered, drawing strength from his unwavering belief. After the dishes were cleared, Luke stepped out onto the porch. The first stars were beginning to appear in the deepening blue of the sky. He leaned against the rough-hewn post, lost in thought. "Perhaps," he murmured to the vast prairie night, "God had a hand in our meeting after all." The thought settled in his heart like a truth. He'd always known, but just discovered. His peaceful reflection was, interrupted by the sound of approaching hoofbeats. In the gathering dusk, he recognized Sam Turner, their nearest neighbor, riding hard toward the cabin. "Luke?" Sam called out, reining his horse to a stop. "Got word from town you need to hear." Luke's shoulders tensed at the urgency in Sam's voice. Behind him, he heard Rhea step onto the porch. "It's Pierce," Sam continued, his expression grim. "He's hired himself a fancy lawyer from back east. They're fixing to file papers, legal action to claim the baby when it comes." Fear clutched at Rhea's heart, and she swayed slightly. Luke was beside her in an instant, his arms steady around her shoulders. "He can't," she whispered. "He abandoned us. He has no right ... He won't succeed," Luke said, firmly, his jaw set with determination. "I gave my word to protect you both, and I mean to keep it." Sam shifted uncomfortably in his saddle. "Pierce has money, Luke, and influence with the territorial judge." "Don't matter," Luke replied, his voice carrying the weight of absolute conviction. "Some things are worth fighting for, no matter the odds." Rhea's hand found Luke's, gripping it tightly. In that moment, their shared strength seemed to push back against the encroaching darkness and the threats it held. "Much obliged for the warning, Sam," Luke said. "We'll be ready." After Sam rode away, they remained on the porch, watching night settle over the prairie. Crickets began their evening chorus, and a cool breeze carried the scent of sage. "I won't let him take your child," Luke promised quietly. "Whatever it costs, whatever we have to do, we'll face it together." Rhea turned to him, moonlight silvering the tears on her cheeks. "I never thought I'd find someone willing to stand with me like this." Luke's hand tightened around hers. "Then it's time you started believing in miracles," he said softly. "Because that's what brought you to my door that day at this station." Above them, stars emerged one by one, their eternal light bearing witness to the promise of two hearts finding strength in unity. Even as storm clouds gathered on the horizon, the morning sun beat down on Luke and Rhea as they made their way to the town clerk's office. Dust swirled around their boots with each step along the wooden sidewalk. Luke held the door, and they entered the cramped space, filled with stacks of leather-bound record books and yellowed papers. Mr. Jenkins. The clerk peered at them over wire-rimmed spectacles. His desk was cluttered with documents bearing official seals, and an ink-stained ledger lay open before him. "What can I do for you folks?" he asked, setting down his pen. Luke cleared his throat. "We need advice about a custody dispute, sir. Randall Pierce is threatening legal action." The clerk's bushy eyebrows rose. "Pierce, you say?" He gestured to two wooden chairs. "Best take a seat." Rhea lowered herself carefully into the chair, her hands clasped tightly in her lap. Luke remained standing, his hat twisted between his fingers. "Now then," Jenkins said, pulling out a thick law book. "Custody matters are complex, especially when wealth and influence are involved." He thumbed through the pages, stopping to tap a paragraph with his finger. "The territorial court tends to favor blood relations, particularly when they can provide material advantages." Rhea's face paled. "But he abandoned us," she whispered. "He promised marriage, then disappeared." Jenkins sighed, removing his spectacles to polish them with a handkerchief. "Without written proof of those promises, it becomes your word against his. And Pierce has connections with Judge Morrison in the territorial seat. Surely the judge would consider the mother's rights," Luke pressed, his jaw tightening. "In theory, yes." Jenkins replaced his spectacles. "But Pierce can argue he has greater means to provide for the child. His lawyer will emphasize his standing in the community. His property holdings ... Luke's knuckles whitened around his hat brim. "And what of character? Of honor?" "Those are harder to prove in court," Jenkins admitted. "I won't mislead you. Pierce's wealth gives him considerable advantage." They left the clerk's office with heavy hearts, stepping back into the harsh sunlight. As they walked down the street, a group of children playing marbles looked up at their approach. "Mama says she's got sin in her belly," one boy called out, pointing at Rhea. "Hush up, Tommy Jenkins," another added with a snicker. "My pa says worse than that." Rhea stumbled slightly, her face crumpling. Luke immediately wrapped his arm around her shoulders. pulling her close against his side. "Pay them no mind," he murmured, though his eyes flashed with anger at the children. "They're just repeating gossip they don't understand." Rhea leaned into his strength, grateful for the steady support as they continued down the street. The sound of the children faded behind them. "Perhaps we should visit Martha," Luke suggested gently. "She's been kind to you," Rhea nodded, wiping at her eyes. The Evans home sat at the edge of town, its neat yard brightened by late-blooming flowers. Martha was hanging washing on the line when they approached. "Well, if it isn't my favorite visitors." Martha called out cheerfully, setting down her basket. Come in. I've just made fresh cider." The interior of Martha's home was warm and welcoming, with braided rugs on the floor and curtains stirring in the breeze. She bustled about, pouring amber cider into tin cups while Luke and Rhea settled at her kitchen table. "Now then," Martha said, joining them. "You both look like you could use a friendly ear." Rhea sipped the cider, its sweet tart flavor soothing her throat. "We visited the clerk," she explained, "about Pierce's threats." Martha's kind face grew serious. "That man has caused enough trouble in this town with his high-handed ways." She reached across the table to pat Rhea's hand. "But don't you lose heart. People are starting to see you differently, especially since you helped Sarah Miller birth her baby." "They are?" Rhea asked softly. Martha nodded firmly. "Just yesterday, I heard Mrs. Peterson telling the Ladies' Aid Society how gentle you were with Sarah, how capable. And widow Thompson mentioned she'd like you to help with her mending. She can't see to thread needles anymore." "That's kind of them," Rhea murmured, color returning to her cheeks. "It's more than kindness," Martha insisted. "It's recognition of your true character." The town's coming around, slow but sure. They stayed for another cup of cider, Martha's steady optimism and practical wisdom helping to ease their worried minds. When they finally stood to leave, Martha pressed a jar of preserved peaches into Rhea's hands. "Remember," she said, walking them to the door, "the good Lord doesn't give us burdens without also giving us the strength to bear them, and friends to help carry the load." The ride home was quiet, both of them lost in thought as the wagon creaked along the rutted road. The sun was low in the sky by the time they reached the shack, painting the prairie grass in shades of gold and amber. Luke unhitched the horses while Rhea went inside to start supper. Through the window, she watched him attack the woodpile with fierce determination, the axe rising and falling in steady rhythm. The sharp crack of splitting wood continued well after darkness fell. Inside, Rhea lit the lamp and spread her quilting pieces on the table. The familiar task of fitting squares together helped calm her mind. Each careful stitch felt like an act of faith, creating something whole and beautiful from scattered fragments. When Luke finally came in, his shirt was dark with sweat despite the cool evening air. He washed up at the basin while Rhea set out bowls of bean soup and elasta. "Martha's morning bread. You didn't have to split all that wood tonight," Rhea said softly as they ate. Luke looked up, his eyes meeting hers across the table. "Needed to do something useful. Can't fight Pierce's money or lawyer, but I can make sure you stay warm." After the dishes were cleared, they sat in the lamplight, Luke cleaning his revolver, Rhea working on her quilt. The familiar click of the needle and soft cloth against the table mingled with the metallic sounds of Luke's gun care. "Whatever comes," Luke said suddenly, setting down his oiled rag. "We'll face it together. Pierce may have money and influence, but we have truth on our side. And maybe that counts for something, even in a court of law." Rhea's hands stilled on her quilt. "I never dreamed anyone would stand by me like this," she said, her voice thick with emotion. "When I stepped off that train, I thought my life was over. But you ... She looked up at him, tears catching the lamplight. "You've given me hope again." Luke moved to her side, his callous hand covering hers where it rested on the quilt squares. "You've given me something too," he said, quietly. "A purpose. A chance to be more than just a drifting ranch hand." "Thank you," Rhea whispered, her eyes glistening. "For everything." The lamp flame flickered, casting warm shadows on the walls of their small home. Outside, a coyote called across the darkened prairie. But inside the shack, Two hearts beat stronger for having found each other. The autumn wind swept across the prairie grass, bending the golden stalks in rippling waves. Dark clouds gathered on the horizon, promising rain as Luke guided his horse along the familiar trail. His hand kept straying to the small leather pouch in his vest pocket, where a simple gold band nestled against his heart. He had risen before dawn, riding into town while Rhea still slept. The jeweler's shop was modest, but the ring Luke chose shone with quiet dignity, a plain circle of gold that represented everything he wanted to offer her: stability, protection, and most of all, love that had grown steady and true as a prairie stream. Now, approaching the shack they shared, Luke saw smoke rising from the chimney. Through the window, he glimpsed Rhea moving about the kitchen, her silhouette graceful despite her advancing pregnancy. The sight made his heart squeeze with tenderness. Inside. Warmth and the smell of baking bread greeted him. Rhea turned from the stove, wiping flour-dusted hands on her apron. "You're back early," she said, smiling. "I was just starting to worry." Luke removed his hat, suddenly nervous. "Had some business in town," he said, his voice rougher than usual. The ring seemed to burn in his pocket. Rhea tilted her head, studying his face. "Is everything all right?" "More than all right." Luke crossed to where she stood. Taking her hands in his, he drew her away from the stove. "Rhea, I need to ask you something." Her eyes widened as he reached into his pocket. When he withdrew the simple gold band, her breath caught audibly. "I know we've done everything backwards," Luke said softly. "And maybe I'm not the man you dreamed of marrying. But these past weeks, watching you face every hardship with such grace, double quotes." He swallowed hard. "You show me what real strength looks like, what love looks like." Tears welled in Rhea's eyes as Luke sank to one knee on the rough wooden floor. "I'm asking proper now. Will you be my wife? Not just for protection or propriety, but because I love you, Rhea Whitcomb. You and the child you carry." Rhea's hands trembled in his. "Luke," she whispered, voice breaking. "Are you certain? With everything that's happened, everything still to come, more certain than I've ever been about anything." He held up the ring. "Will you have me?" "Yes," Rhea breathed, tears spilling down her cheeks. "Yes, with all my heart." Luke's hand shook slightly as he slipped the ring onto her finger. It fit perfectly, catching the morning light that streamed through the window. When he stood, Rhea threw her arms around his neck, and he held her close, breathing in the scent of flower and sunshine that clung to her hair. "We'll need to see Preacher Fenton," Luke said after a moment, still holding her. "Make everything proper and legal." Rhea's arms tightened around him. "Do you think he'll agree this time?" Only one way to find out. They hitched up the wagon, Luke helping Rhea carefully onto the seat. The wind had picked up, carrying the promise of rain as they drove toward town. At the church, they found Preacher Fenton in his study, bent over his Bible. The preacher looked up as they entered, his stern face unreadable. "Mr. McAllister, Miss Whitcomb, what brings you here today?" Luke stepped forward, keeping Rhea's hand firmly in his. "We've come to ask you to marry us, preacher." Proper and legal before God and the community. Fenton's eyes moved between them, lingering on their clasped hands. "You know my position on this matter. Without full truth, I'm ready to tell the truth," Rhea interrupted quietly. Both men turned to look at her. "About everything. About Mr. Pierce, about what happened in Missouri." Her voice trembled, but held firm. "I've carried this shame long enough. If honesty is what's required, then I'll speak it all." The preacher studied her for a long moment. "Very well," he said finally. "Return in 2 weeks' time. If you prove your honesty, then I will perform the ceremony." 2 weeks? Luke frowned. "Why not sooner?" "To give time for proper bands to be posted," Fenton explained. And double quotes, his expression softened slightly. "To give Miss Whitcomb time to prepare her for the truth-telling that must come." Outside, the first drops of rain began to fall as Luke helped Rhea back into the wagon. The soft patter grew stronger as they drove home, but neither minded the gentle soaking. The rain felt cleansing, like a blessing from above that evening. After supper was cleared away, Rhea knelt beside their narrow bed. Luke paused in banking the fire, watching as she clasped her hands in prayer. The lamplight cast a gentle glow around her, making her seem almost luminous. Her lips moved silently, but Luke could see the strength in her bowed shoulders, the quiet determination in her folded hands. This was the woman who had faced public shame with dignity, who had delivered a neighbor's baby through the night, who was preparing to bare her soul to protect their future together. As he watched her pray, Luke felt his heart swell with love so profound it nearly took his breath away. He had thought himself content with his solitary life, but now he knew his heart belonged wholly to this gentle, courageous woman and the child she carried. When Rhea finally rose from her prayers, she found Luke waiting with a warm quilt. He wrapped it around her shoulders, drawing her close. "Whatever comes," he murmured against her hair. "Whatever truth needs telling, we'll face it together." Rhea leaned into his embrace, her hand finding his where the gold band caught the lamplight. "Together?" she agreed softly. Outside, the autumn rain continued to fall, a steady rhythm on the roof of their small home. The wind whistled through the prairie grass, but inside, warmth and love created a shelter stronger than any storm. Autumn days grew shorter as Luke and Rhea prepared for their wedding. Morning frost sparkled on the prairie grass when Luke rose each day, his breath visible in the crisp air as he headed out to tend the livestock. Inside their small shack, Rhea worked steadily at her sewing, transforming yards of simple muslin into something beautiful. Martha Evans had become a frequent visitor, bringing not only her skilled hands for sewing, but also welcome companionship. The two women sat by the window where the clear morning light was best for detailed work. Their needles flashed as they shaped the wedding dress, their quiet conversation punctuated by the peaceful sound of thread being pulled through fabric. "You've got a natural touch with that needle," Martha observed, watching Rhea create tiny, even stitches along a seam. "Where did you learn to sew so fine?" "My mother taught me," Rhea replied softly, smoothing the muslin across her lap. "She always said a woman's stitches tell the story of her patience." Martha nodded, threading her needle with practiced ease. "Well, these stitches tell me you've got patience enough to build a good marriage." "That's what it takes, patience and trust, built one day at a time." Outside, they could hear the rhythmic sound of Luke splitting wood. The pile by the house grew steadily larger each day as he prepared for the coming winter. The sound of his axe was somehow comforting, a steady reminder of his presence and protection. "He's a good man," Martha said, following Rhea's gaze toward the window. "The whole town's beginning to see it, how he stood by you. Worked hard to make a proper home." Rhea's hands stilled on the fabric. "I never expected such kindness," she admitted. "From Luke or from you, Martha?" "After everything ... Hush now," Martha interrupted gently. "The Lord works in mysterious ways. Sometimes what looks like misfortune turns out to be blessing in disguise." The dress took shape slowly under their careful hands. The design was simple but elegant. A high collar, long sleeves, and a gathered skirt that would accommodate Rhea's growing belly. The plainness of the muslin was transformed by careful details. Tiny tucks at the bodice, delicate gathering at the wrists, a row of small covered buttons down the back. Word of their upcoming wedding spread through the town like ripples in a pond. To Rhea's surprise, the ripples brought unexpected kindness in their wake. One morning, Mrs. Peterson from the Mercantile left a basket of fresh eggs on their doorstep. The next day, Widow Thompson brought a precious scrap of lace, yellowed with age but still beautiful. "It was from my own wedding dress," the widow explained, pressing the lace into Rhea's hands. "Seems fitting it should grace another bride's collar." Each small gesture helped heal the wounds of those first harsh days in town. Luke noticed the change, too, and the way men nodded to him at the feed store, how the whispers had largely died away. He worked harder than ever, determined to prove himself worthy of this growing acceptance. The days fell into a rhythm. Luke rose before dawn to tend the livestock and repair fences, the physical labor helping to channel his nervous energy as the wedding approached. He hauled extra water to fill the rain barrel, split more wood than they could use in a month, and even attempted to smooth the packed dirt floor of their cabin. One afternoon, he rode into town to speak with Preacher Fenton about the ceremony. The preacher's stern face had softened somewhat over the weeks, impressed by Luke's steady dedication. "You understand the responsibility you're taking on?" Fenton asked, his Bible open on the desk between them. "Yes, sir, I do," Luke answered without hesitation. "Rhea and the child, they're my family now. Whatever comes, I'll provide for them, protect them." The preacher nodded slowly. "I believe you will, son. I believe you will." Each evening, Luke and Rhea shared simple meals at their small table. Their conversation easier now, full of plans and hopes for their future together. They discussed practical matters, how to rearrange the cabin's sparse furniture to make room for a cradle, whether to plant a vegetable garden come spring, how to repair the loose shutter before winter storms arrived. But they also shared deeper thoughts, their growing trust allowing for greater honesty. Luke spoke of his lonely years as a young orphan, drifting from ranch to ranch, never daring to imagine a family of his own. Rhea revealed more about her life before, not just the pain of betrayal, but happy memories too. Helping her mother preserve peaches, singing hymns with her sisters, learning to make soap from her grandmother. The night before their wedding dawned clear and cool. The stars scattered like diamonds across the velvet sky. After supper, Luke helped Rhea onto the porch, wrapping a quilt around her shoulders against the evening chill. They sat together on the rough-hewn bench he'd made, listening to the coyotes calling in the distance. "Are you nervous about tomorrow?" Luke asked softly, his hand finding hers beneath the quilt. Rhea considered the question carefully. "Not nervous exactly," she said. "More ... grateful. When I stepped off that train, I thought my life was over." Instead, it was just beginning. Luke's hand tightened around hers. "I thank God every day you came here," he said, his voice rough with emotion, "even if it wasn't the way either of us planned." Rhea turned to face him, her eyes bright in the starlight. "Sometimes the best blessings are the ones we never thought to pray for." Luke reached up slowly, his calloused hand gentle against her cheek. The moment stretched between them, full of tenderness and promise. Then, with infinite care, he lowered his head and kissed her dot. It was a soft kiss, sweet and reverent as a prayer. When they parted, Rhea's eyes were shining with tears, but her smile was radiant. Luke pulled her closer, and together they sat in comfortable silence, watching the stars wheel overhead. The worst seemed truly behind them now. Tomorrow they would stand before God and their neighbors, pledging their lives to each other. The path ahead would not be easy. They both knew that. But they would face it together, their bond strengthened by the trials they'd already weathered. Inside the cabin, Rhea's wedding dress hung ready for tomorrow, its simple lines transformed by love and care into something beautiful. The scrap of borrowed lace graced the collar, a reminder that even in the hardest times, kindness could bloom like wildflowers after rain. The morning sun painted the prairie sky in soft pinks and golds as Rhea stood before the small mirror in Martha's spare room. Her trembling fingers smoothed the muslin dress, touching the borrowed lace at her collar. Martha helped pin her hair, tucking wild strands beneath a simple veil made from netting. "You look beautiful," Martha whispered, squeezing Rhea's shoulders. Every inch a bride. The little church filled quickly with townspeople, their faces a mix of curiosity and grudging acceptance. Some still whispered behind their hands, but others smiled warmly. Luke stood at the altar, wearing his best shirt and a new string tie, his boots polished to a shine. His eyes never left the door, waiting. When the organ wheezed to life, Rhea appeared in the doorway. Luke's face transformed, joy and pride washing away his usual reserve. Each step down the aisle felt like floating to Rhea, her heart full of gratitude for this unexpected blessing. Preacher Fenton opened his Bible, his stern expression softened by the moment. "Dearly beloved," the doors crashed open with a bang that made the windows rattle. Randall Pierce strode down the aisle, his expensive boots clicking against the wooden floor. Behind him came his lawyer, clutching papers, and the sheriff, looking uncomfortable but determined. "This wedding cannot proceed," Pierce announced, his voice cutting through the shocked silence. "That woman promised her child to me." I have the legal documents right here. The preacher closed his Bible slowly. Mr. Pierce, this is a house of God, and the law is the law. Pierce's lawyer interrupted, waving the papers. We have a claim of custody that must be settled before any marriage can take place. Luke stepped forward, his jaw set. You have no right. Two of Pierce's hired men appeared from the crowd. The first punch caught Luke by surprise, sending him staggering. The second dropped him to his knees. Blood trickled from his split lip as more blows fell. Luke. Rhea tried to run to him, but Pierce blocked her path. The courts will settle this, Pierce sneered. That child is mine by right. Luke struggled to his feet, swaying. His eyes found Rhea's across the chaos. Stay strong, he whispered. Before his legs gave out and he collapsed, the wedding guests scattered in confusion as Pierce swept out, leaving his threats hanging in the air like storm clouds. The sheriff helped Luke to a pew while Rhea pressed her handkerchief to his bleeding face, her wedding dress stained with his blood. Luke lay on his bunk, wincing as Rhea pressed a cool cloth to his bruised face. The swelling around his eye had turned purple, and his split lip throbbed with each breath. She'd made poultices from herbs Martha had brought, their sharp scent filling the small shack. Maybe I should just leave, Rhea whispered, her hands trembling as she wrung out the cloth. Save you from more trouble. No. Luke caught her wrist gently. We faced this together. 3 days later, the court summons arrived, ordering them to appear before the judge. The morning of the hearing dawned cold and gray. They rode slowly into town, the wagon jolting over every rut. Inside the wooden courthouse, Rhea's legs felt weak, but Luke's steady hand at her elbow kept her upright. Pierce's lawyer spoke first, his words sharp and precise about rights and promises. When the judge called Rhea forward, she rose on shaking legs. Her voice quavered at first, but grew stronger as she finally spoke her truth. I trusted Randall Pierce, she began, facing the packed courtroom. He promised marriage, then left me with child and alone. Preacher Fenton rose from his seat, his weathered Bible clutched in his hands. Your Honor, I've watched Luke McAllister these past months. He's a man of quiet faith and steady character. When others turned away, he offered shelter and dignity. Martha Evans stood next, her voice clear and strong. Rhea delivered my neighbor's baby in the midst of a storm. She's shown nothing but grace under the cruelest judgment. More townspeople rose, sharing tales of Rhea's gentle spirit and Luke's unwavering protection. Pierce's face darkened with each testimony. Finally, he exploded from his chair. She promised me that child. He shouted, fist clenched. It's my blood, am I right? Silence. The judge's gavel cracked like thunder. A man who abandons his responsibilities forfeits his claims. This court finds for the mother and her chosen household. The courtroom erupted in cheers. Luke pulled Rhea close, his arms trembling around her. We're free, he whispered against her hair. Tears of joy streamed down her face as the townsfolk gathered to congratulate them. Snow drifted like lace across the prairie, as the small church filled with warmth and whispered blessings. Rhea stood radiant in her muslin gown, her eyes fixed on Luke as Preacher Fenton's voice rang clear with joy. What God has joined together, let no man put asunder. The church bells pealed across the winter morning as they exchanged rings and promises. Townspeople who had once turned away now filled the pews with smiling faces. Weeks melted into precious moments in their snug shack. By lamplight, Rhea cradled their newborn son, his tiny face peaceful in sleep. Luke settled beside them, his calloused fingers gentle as they traced the baby's small hand. You were mine the moment I claimed you, Luke whispered, his voice thick with emotion. Rhea leaned into his strength, tears of gratitude sparkling in her eyes. The fireplace crackled warmly as neighbors' gifts surrounded them. Fresh bread, soft blankets, and heartfelt notes of welcome Dot and the golden light. They sat together, a family born of choice, strengthened by faith, and blessed by grace. Dot, if today's story reminded you of the quiet strength of love, I'd love to see you again. Subscribe, and tomorrow we'll meet right here, where love speaks softly and stays.